So for those of you keeping track, we're up to the third Last Supper. So a couple of weeks ago, we did what we talked about as the first Last Supper, where Jesus institutes the actual communion liturgy, the communion that we celebrate today. And then, of course, last week we talked about the fact, while we call that the Last Supper, it really wasn't the Last Supper because he followed behind those people to Emmaus and ended up having a meal with them and breaking bread with them. And now we get to this moment on the beach with the disciples and John, which in John's gospel anyway, if you notice where we are, we're in chapter 21, which is the last chapter of John's gospel. In this gospel anyway, this truly is the Last Supper, the last meal that Jesus has with his disciples. And of course, he has it in the form of a barbecue at the beach because Jesus is awesome. And he's a man after my own heart. All right. So what's going on here at the beginning? We're in this kind of limbo time, right? I mean, Jesus has, the disciples have gone through all the stuff. They've watched Jesus die. They've watched Jesus been resurrected. He has appeared to them a couple of times to show and demonstrate that he is actually still alive or has come back to life. But he hasn't given them any clear instructions yet onto what to do with themselves. So in John's gospel anyway, they're kind of left for a good period of time after really that first Easter, with several days or weeks there where they're not sure what to do, right? They know they want to stay together. They're still a group. Jesus is occasionally showing up. They don't want to miss that. But after a while, as you might expect as people do, it kind of seems like maybe they just kind of got bored and they ran out of things to do. And Peter, who of course was himself a fisherman before Jesus kind of messed up his life, decided to do what he knows how to do, which is go fishing. So apparently what happens in the Bible is a bunch of really bored guys choose to go fishing. Nothing's changed in 2,000 years. And so they go fishing in the way that they know how to go fishing. And this isn't with rods and reels or anything like that, but they've got a boat and a net and they go out on the lake and they're trying to catch something. And obviously they are unsuccessful in catching something. And this has actually happened before in the gospel. There was another time earlier in the disciples' life where they were out on the boat and unsuccessful doing it. And then this person shows up and says, hey, fish over there, right? Now, I'm not really a strong fisherman. It's not something I spend a lot of my time doing. But I imagine, having been around some, that sometimes when somebody shows up and says, hey, you idiot, you're fishing in the wrong place, right? This is not always advice that is heard well, right? Like, who are you to tell me where to fish? Well, the disciples decide that they're going to listen to this guy, and they cast their net on the other side, and they pull up what then would have to be kind of a once-in-a-lifetime load of fish, like the fishing story of all fishing stories. Like, I caught one and it was this big, right? I caught this many in my net. No one will ever believe how much fish that they managed to bring up. And it's at that moment where two things happen. One is Peter recognizes that it's Jesus, right? He's like, wait a minute, that just wasn't some random dude we were listening to. That was Jesus. And the second important thing that happens is Peter decides to put some clothes on. Because for some reason, the scripture decides to tell us that he's naked. Now, this is one of those weird little details in the scripture, and I've mentioned this before. If they bother to include a detail, it's usually important, right? I mean, these things were transcribed by hand, right? I mean, there wasn't a lot of ink or parchment to spare. So if we were told this, you're kind of like, why? Well, we're going to do a little dive deep here. So the Greek word, and I know you love it when I say things like the Greek word. But the Greek word actually for here that we translate as naked is actually gymnos. And it's the same, you can probably see where this is going. Gymnos is the same root word that we would use today for things like gymnast or gymnasium would be the same thing. And the reason why was in Jesus' time and in Greek time, if you were going to engage in athletic activity, severe exertion of energy, oftentimes you would do it wearing as little clothes as possible because Nike wasn't a thing yet, right? They don't have what we have today. They don't have the fancy fabrics that wick all the stuff away or whatever. Most of the time they're in these kind of heavier, very loose-fitting outfits, of the time, or robes or things like that. Things that are not conducive to athletic activity. And in fact, every time you watch the Olympics, somewhere in Olympic commentary, someone will point out to a side, well, you know, Jim, back in the ancient days, the Olympians competed naked. That will be said somewhere at Olympic controversy. And it's true, because if you look at like pottery at the time or depictions of people running at the time, you will see that they're pretty much always depicted, as not wearing any clothes, because that's what you would do. And you did it for the very simple reason, as it was the most comfortable way to do it. Because the clothing that was mostly worn at the time was not conducive to that kind of activity, because that's not what a lot of people did. Again, you just didn't have Lululemon yet. Those poor, poor people. All right. And actually, so we tend to translate that word as naked. To translate gymnos as naked. The more accurate translation would actually be to be without, right? Without clothes, which is actually kind of helpful, because especially when Jesus gives commandments like don't forget to clothe the naked, and I'm like, how many naked people were running around 2,000 years ago? And like, do you have to be told that that's not okay? I mean, doesn't default human instinct take over? Like, yes, please put something on. But really what Jesus meant in that way is what they talk about when they talk about naked, they mean just lacking clothes or lacking proper clothes. So in the same way that we, may take up a coat drive for kids, in the wintertime if they don't have a proper coat, or you see somebody who's, or we have ministries that help like women get, nice clothes for job interviews if they don't have it because they are lacking the right clothes. So it's not only just lacking clothes, period. It's lacking like appropriate clothes. So to be without clothes. So by the way, not for nothing, the proper translation then of the Greek word like the word gymnasium would be the place of naked training. So next time you go to the gym, or you're down at the Y, you can let them know. Glad everybody's dressed. So. All right, so why do they do it? They do it because it's comfortable. They do it because so why is Peter undressed? He's probably not honestly completely undressed, but he's more undressed than he would be just walking around, because they're exerting themselves, because they're doing hard work, because it's easy. So Peter has to get dressed, and honestly, he's doing it because it's comfortable. Because he's around people he's comfortable with. He's on a boat with his friends. Right? He doesn't have to do all the things that he would normally do around, strangers or just people in the general public. They're offshore, and Peter is in a place where he can basically sort of let his guard down physically and emotionally, I suppose. And he gets comfortable because he's with his friend. But now, of course, he has to jump in the water, and he's kind of going back into that public space where Jesus is, and so he chooses to get dressed. So when they come on shore, they find, what do they find? They don't just find Jesus there. They find while they were out fishing, Jesus was cooking breakfast. And he cooks fish on a fire, because everything should be cooked with fire and smoke, as far as I'm concerned. And he bakes them some bread, and he invites them, and he says, come have breakfast with me. Early morning hours, Jesus sits down with his friends and offers them a breakfast of freshly made fish and bread. He offers this to a group of fishermen. No doubt in Peter's life and in all their lives, it was not uncommon for their mother or their sister or somebody else in their family to do this exact same thing. While the men, because this is how society was back then, we just have to get over it, because while the men were out fishing, the women were no doubt, the women in their lives, the women that they loved and loved them, were no doubt preparing food for them to eat, knowing they would come back hungry. How many times in Peter's life did he likely come home or come to shore after a hard day fishing to find his mother or somebody else he loves having prepared food for him in the same way that Jesus does? By cooking the breakfast on the shore, Jesus assumes this role of servant, similar to how he did only a few weeks before when he washed the disciples' feet. He's doing it again. And this time he's doing it with food. And not just any food, but something that was no doubt comfort food for these folks. Because how many times did they probably enjoy this very meal after a hard night's work with their friends and their families? And so here we have Jesus at the real, truly, honest-to-goodness Last Supper, which is actually apparently the last breakfast. And he offers them this again. We all have those things in life, and I think we all have those foods in life that comfort us. So as I said at the beginning of the service, I did invite you all to kind of tell us what that is, because I'm curious what it was for you all. And hopefully we have the results up. Do we have the results? There we go. All right, so this is a word cloud. So the bigger the word is, the more important that it is. We'll post this on Facebook later if you want to really dig into it. No surprise to see pizza there. A little surprised about the mashed potatoes. The pizza and the ice cream, baked potato. You know, the mashed potatoes is the first thing to go to my house too, so I'm not sure what to talk about this. Right, so we all have those things, and some of them are fairly standard. We have the mashed potatoes and the pizza and the ice cream. We also have we got fried chicken. I can't really see this. Hold on, over there. Candy corn. Candy corn is foul. God bless you. You know, grilled cheese sandwich, German chocolate cake, cookie, meatloaf, thin pancakes. That's remarkably specific. Macaroni and cheese, mom's spaghetti. Oh, mom's spaghetti. All right. If mine was up, the one that was up there for me was lasagna, and it's lasagna because I like lasagna and I think it's fun. It's really good, and I think I have talked about lasagna before to you all. It's the proper way to have lasagna is with sliced hard-boiled eggs on top. Some of you didn't believe me last time, and you're still wrong. Okay. But why? Why is it that way? And I think about why is that way? And it's because, if I'm honest, it's because every time I had a birthday, or every time something special was happening in my life and I got to be the one that picked the meal, I would always pick lasagna. So I like it because I like it. And I like it because in those moments when I got to pick, and neither my brother or my sister got to, I would pick it. And frankly, if you haven't made lasagna in a long time, you know it takes a long time. So it's not something you're going to make all that often. So the fact that I could ask for it, and that my mother would go through all the time and energy and effort as a single mother of 3 children, and say, okay, it's your birthday, or it's whatever's going on, I'm happy to do that for you. And then she would slice the eggs so lovingly and put them on the top where they belong. So it's not just the food that I enjoy. It's not just the food that I enjoy, though I do enjoy it. It's everything that goes along with it. It's every birthday I ate it at. It's every time that I did it. And it's those times when, and frankly, in my life now, it's those times when I've had the chance to make it for other people. When you're invited to bring something to the potluck, and I want to bring something that, if nothing else, will bring me joy. And if nothing, or solicit some questions as to why exactly is there egg on top of your lasagna. I love to take it to them. So anytime you have a chance to do that, now it's become not only do I enjoy receiving it when I was a kid, there is joy in giving it, taking that time and the energy to hopefully do something that you hope will brighten somebody else's day. It's a comfort to me when I get to have it, and my hope is that it's a comfort to someone else when I get to give it away. I like the fact that the closing scene in John's Gospel, and this is the closing scene in John's Gospel, if you keep reading, everything that happens after this moment, which is not much, continues to happen between Jesus and the disciples at this beach. So I love the imagery of it. One of the things that I do love about John's Gospel is John's Gospel really is kind of into the image and the mood of what's going on. And I love that the kind of panning out from the close to the wide shot that you'd have in the movie, right? Like if this is a movie, you start with a close shot of Jesus talking with Peter, because that's the last thing that happens is Jesus talks to Peter. There would be the slowly panning out wide shot, and it would be a picture of a group of friends sitting around a fire at the beach, enjoying food that they loved, having conversations with one another, and feeling what was no doubt a great deal of care and comfort for one another. I love that this is the way that John's Gospel ends. And it reminds us that one of the things that we seek in God and that we seek in each other and we seek in the church is this similar kind of comfort. Those moments, whether they are formal or informal, whether they are casual or with purpose, however they happen, those moments when we can share our time and energy with one another. Because there's something else, if you notice it went by kind of quick, that Jesus did in this moment. He not only gave them fish, but once again, he baked them bread, and he broke it. Jesus takes this remarkably simple, common, everyday task. Those of us who live in the days of sliced bread don't realize that it didn't used to be that way. And that every meal, almost every meal, would involve somebody having to take bread and somehow divide it, breaking it, knife, whatever, so that it could be shared. This was an incredibly common thing, and yet Jesus took this incredibly common activity, this thing that the people had done probably every day of their lives to some degree or another, and elevated and made it something else. He took something about friends at the beach, he took something about a meal together, he took something about bread and the simple act of dividing it to share it, and he turned it into something more than what it was. He turned it into something so important that today in our church we actually have kind of enshrined it and encased it in what we often call ritual. Right? The ritual of communion, the ritual of baptisms. We have rituals in our lives of those church, those things we come back to. They say, this activity, this thing is so important, right? We need to make sure that we do it the correct way. Now, as Methodists, we do have some rituals, believe it or not, though we don't have a ton. I will confess, there are definitely Christian traditions that are a lot more into their rituals than we are. If you've ever spent time in like an Orthodox church, you're like, man, those people, they like their ritual. They know the words to everything, and they expect you to know the words too. I've been blessed in life to be able to do this, spend time in Orthodox churches and in those kind of places. It's one of the things that when a couple weeks ago we talked about when I went to India, several churches, and there's a huge stream of Christianity, the Church of St. Thomas, which is an Orthodox church in India, and they have a lot of ritual and everything, kind of like this way. And so when we think about ritual, sometimes I think this is what we think about. Right? We think about those times and those places where everything is very, very scripted and everything has to be done in a certain way. And that is a form of ritual. It is. But I think what you will notice if we look at the scripture, if we look at the story of Jesus, he does that stuff, but not very often. And I do think sometimes we need to expand our understanding of really what is ritual and what does it mean. And as Methodists, we are blessed in that we are allowed to do that because Wesley kind of liked ritual and kind of didn't. But Wesley also had an expanded idea of what it is to have ritual in our lives. I would argue that ritual comes in, yes, the high forms, like when we say the communion liturgy and those sorts of places. But ritual can also be a daily part of our lives. What was the difference? What's the difference between simply dividing bread so everyone can have a piece and what Jesus did when Jesus did it? I think one of the things that Jesus calls us to, that is present in every time we see Jesus break bread, is there's this notion of gratitude. He does it. Even at the Last Supper, he says, take the bread, break it, and be grateful. We are called to have gratitude for what's in our lives, the important things and the big things, and also the small, everyday things. And by taking something as simple as bread that is small and everyday, and taking an activity that people have done, no doubt, hundreds, if not thousands of times in their lives, and giving it new meaning and new purpose, not because the bread is any different or anything else is any different, it's because the heart that we have, the mind that we have when we come to it is different. The bread is special on that beach because Jesus is there sharing love and companionship and comfort with his friends. And by breaking the bread and handing it out, he's calling them to be grateful for that time in that moment. If we want to feel closer to God, if we want to have more true, honest ritual in our lives, then we should be looking for opportunities where we can feel and express our gratitude. The gratitude we feel when big, amazing things happen, and the gratitude we feel for those simple, everyday activities when we get to see the flowers on the West Garden, or smell the fresh baked bread, or those even more amazing times when we get to gather with our friends. We get to gather with our family. When we get to share our love with one another. And when we do those things, we have a choice. We can just go through the motion and make them something that's nice to happen, or we can choose to make them something more. Not by changing what we're doing. We can make them something more by changing the heart we bring to it. We can look around the table and whoever may be joining us and be grateful that they are there. Be grateful that God put those people in our lives. Even our cousin from, far away that bugs us. Grateful even for that person to be in our lives and to break bread with. Because at the end of the day, the truth is life is a gift. We are given this gift, and we are given this gift not to take it for granted. We are given the gift to take it and be grateful for it. So in what ways can we bring that practice of gratitude to the small and simple things in our lives? Can we thank God for the opportunity of a new day when we're brushing our teeth in our morning, because we all brush our teeth in the morning? Can we thank God for the joy that was present in our day when we sit down for dinner at the end of the night? Can we take the bread and break it and share it amongst our friends and be grateful for those times that we can do it? Because if we can bring that sort of gratitude into our lives in big and small ways, then we are inviting God and we are inviting Christ into our lives in those big and small ways. Because if Jesus can do it around a campfire with nothing but a couple of fish and a loaf of bread, then we can certainly do it with the abundance that most of us have been blessed with. So let us be grateful. Grateful for what we have, grateful for what we are given, and grateful for this opportunity to gather. Amen.